Welcome back to my channel. I'm really happy that you guys decided to join me for this video, especially given the topic and the title, because these things are really difficult to talk about. They are difficult to think about, especially for Black people. Having to experience this all over again, I know can be difficult. So because I've consumed so much of the trial today, I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about the things that happened today, some of the testimony that we've heard, what the defense has planned. We don't really know at this point. And then some of the takeaways from the trial. Yesterday was day one of the trial, and this is where the opening statements happened from both the defense and the prosecution. So I didn't really see day one. I mainly saw some highlights and caught up on cable news in terms of some of the things that happened. And it appears that the defense is going to really focus on this idea that the officers or officer in question, ex-officer, that there was this unruly crowd. There was these people that were being distracting because of this crowd that had gathered, and that is essentially what was happening. I think the only question, even at the end of the day, I think that I'm really confused in terms of the defense is, there's this unruly crowd, this crowd that is hurling offensive language and all this stuff. It is distracting him from what exactly? Was it distracting him from giving aid? Was it distracting him from doing his job, which is what exactly? Like, what was it distracting him from doing? Because that's still not clear, and that's not the prosecution's job to answer that. That's like the defense's job. That part of the defense I don't really understand. I'll say that outright. And that the main part of their defense is that the murder was not, in fact, caused by the ex-police officer, Derek Chauvin, but that it was the drugs that were found in his system, and essentially suggesting that there was an overdose, but suggesting that his health in conjunction with the drugs that were found in his system is essentially what led to his death. So the prosecution, it appears, I'm not exactly sure, again, because I didn't see that part, what they are kind of building on. But I will say, based on today, they're building a very compelling case solely centered around the evidence, the very compelling evidence that most people saw, because we learned today, and maybe this is information that was given earlier, but we learned today that one of the jurors, this was their very first time seeing this video. Let's roll into day two and the testimony that we heard from the witnesses. So the first witness to take the stand was an MMA fighter, someone who wrestled as a young person, then went on to do some wrestling in college, and then moved over to mixed martial arts, fighting in both amateur and professional. And the reason why I bring that up is because that was a really big part of the testimony. I felt like, especially on the case of the defense, because it felt as though they were really trying to build this case based on the things that he said, not as his personal experience, not as a person who was a wrestler and MMA fighter seeing, something that you might normally see, but that they were trying to treat him as an expert, which to my knowledge, that is like a whole different protocol when we have an expert witness on the stand and just like a regular dayless megular witness on the stand. And so that, from my vantage point, was a little frustrating, because that's not what he was there to do. Yet it felt like that's the position that they were trying to push him in. The most compelling part of his testimony is that when they began to play his 911 call, he got emotional. He teared up, wiped tears multiple times, and you could feel and understand like how difficult it is. Not that I'm already sitting on this stand and I have to recount what happened and go off my memory for these very painful experiences, but then I get to hear, right, the pain in my voice. I get to hear how upset and angry I was. Actually, not angry. That's my bad, excuse me. Just how upsetting the situation was. We'll come back to the anger in a minute, but just how upsetting the situation was. it evoked emotion from him. So he places a 911 call because he said he felt like he witnessed a murder. And he said in the courtroom, yeah, I called the cops on the cops because he knew that he witnessed something that was wrong. In that call, he was transferred to a supervisor. Something happened. The call is disconnected. He doesn't exactly remember what happened with the call being disconnected, but it was disconnected. Similar situation happened with the firefighter who also called to report what happened after everything was over. So there was some contention with the lawyer today with this particular witness questioning. There was a point where he kept trying to ask these questions of his emotion and also did the same thing with the firefighter, again, trying to paint the picture of this crowd being unruly. And so he kept making the question of, you were angry, or were you angry? And, your emotions were angry. And over and over kept repeating that he was very much in control of his body, that he was growing in professionalism. And then once you could see, it just got to the point that he just had to say, you're not going to paint me as angry. And that's what he said outright, which was completely true and fair. And I was really happy that he stood up for himself in that moment, because I felt like there were times where the firefighter tried to stand up for herself and it didn't necessarily go that way, but they allowed that comment to stand. But I thought it was very, very important that he stand up, because there's always this narrative being painted in the media. There's always this narrative being painted socially that Black people, particularly Black men, are these angry people almost inherently. So the next testimony that we hear from is a young lady, actually the young lady who took the video. And so this was one of the hardest testimonies to listen to, even though we're going to hear from a 9-year-old. This was one of the hardest testimonies to listen to because of what she said a little bit later, which I'll get to. So this girl was going to the store with her cousin to get snacks. At the time, she is 17. And they also, at the time, were trying to paint this idea that the neighborhood was unsafe and that it was a bad neighborhood. And so there's questions about, did you feel safe and that sort of thing, which, she said she did, went to the store hundreds of times, never any issues. And so for me, what was overwhelming is because you see the video of them walking by and you see it from the perspective, not zoomed in where her video was taken, but actually across the street. So you see the store, you see her walking by, and then you see the squad car with the officers and George Floyd. But as she's walking by, because she already understands what happens or what is happening, she gets her cousin in the store and already knew as a 17-year-old that this was a moment that she could not let go by, but also that she was concerned for what her, I believe at the time, 8-year-old cousin was going to witness if she did not go into the store. So she ensured that she went into the store and then came back and pulled out her phone and began recording. And I can't imagine the amount of fear that she must have felt in that moment, because she already understood what was taking place and felt it was important that she document this moment. And the reason why I call into her heroism in this moment is because we've seen in protests, we've seen on the street before and after people have taken video what's happened to them, or people that have tried to intervene in these types of situations. And so I want to applaud the heroism of a 17-year-old child who not only wanted to and was concerned about the safety of someone else, but they knew that this moment was too big and that she had to be there to record. I thought was very, very important. So the part of her testimony that I was instantly angry, and you're talking about just ready to fight instantly, was a line of questioning from the defense. And he asked about her recording the video, and he said, you took the recording, something similar to that. And then at the end he said, kind of changed your life, or changed your life, huh? And I was like, huh? Even if she had not recorded the video, even if she'd have never taken out her phone, even if it had never gone viral, which he mentioned, her life would have forever been changed because of what she saw that day, because of your client. So let's not pretend as if this video going viral got sis a paid sponsorship or has changed her life in terms of the money that her family is getting. it changed her life in terms of the trauma that she now has to endure because of what your client did. And so because he put that bullshit out there, honestly, it was a perfect question and a setup for the prosecution to then ask, he said something to the effect of, it changed your life. Tell me how it did change your life. And that was the very first time in the trial that race had been invoked, especially from a witness. And she spoke to the fact that it changed her life because when she saw that, she saw her dad, she saw her brother, she saw her black friends. And then she began to cry and break down and said that she cries at night apologizing to George Floyd that she could not do more to save his life. That was difficult to hear. But then was what also, I guess, I'm not sure the adjective I would put on it, but I was happy to hear her after that express that she couldn't do more to save his life. But in that moment, she realized it wasn't about what she couldn't do. It was about him, the officer, and his actions. And so I was just really, really happy, I guess, that she had that clarity and understood that even in all of the trauma and the difficulty that she is facing, she understands that that wasn't her responsibility. Yet another witness speaking to wanting to do something, wanting to help because they witnessed a man in distress and not being able to. The next testimony that we heard from was her cousin, the 9-year-old girl who, and I wore this love shirt from CEOs, a local company here in Oklahoma City, and I'll link where you can get this down below. But I wore this because her sweatshirt that day had love on it. And I thought that was very ironic given what happened and the trauma that she experienced that day, given the message that she was spreading that day. So the most compelling part of her testimony, I thought, was when she said that it made her sad and mad because they wouldn't help him. And there was a point where they were asking her about, the paramedics had finally come and asking her what happened. And she said that they asked the officer nicely to get off of his neck and that he didn't get off. And so... Again, just really, really hard to know that Black children are constantly having to experience trauma at the hands of state-sponsored violence. It's sad. So, another testimony came from another young woman who I believe was 16 at the time. She's now a 17-year-old senior. And I thought the most compelling part of her testimony, when she spoke about wanting to help, she spoke specifically to the power dynamic. And she said, the power and those in power were already they were there. There was nothing that she could do. She also spoke to, and she broke down when she mentioned wanting to help and wanting to physically be able to do something, but because of the power, she couldn't. And I don't understand how at the hands of what happens during these police encounters and the trauma that is inflicted on the community and children, how they're not held responsible for that. These are children that are going to continue for a very long time, if not for the rest of their life, continue to feel the after effects of the trauma that they experienced that day because of the negligence of this officer. And so I don't understand how they also, in all of this, and the settlement with the city and all of that, how that is also not accounted for, because these children absolutely need to be paid for their pain, period. So the very last testimony of the day was, she was the first white person that we'd heard from today, which I'm always thinking about, what are other people thinking about when they're seeing this and experiencing this? And so on the part of the jurors, how are they taking in her information and taking it as credible, as opposed to, say, the MMA fighter, right? So that was one of the dynamics that I thought about, but also because she's a firefighter, so she comes with a level of credential that these other citizens just didn't have. And then she showed up in uniform, which just visibly is going to lend itself a level of credibility. And so they continued that questioning of the dangerous neighborhood, because she actually lived in the neighborhood. She is a firefighter at a unit about 3 blocks, I believe she said, from the Cup food store where this took place, and she lives in the area and was actually on a walk and trying to get some peace because it was her day off. And unfortunately, because racism cost everybody, and I cannot remember her name, but there's a brilliant lady who is often a commentator on MSNBC, but she has a book out called The Cost of Racism Cost Everybody, The Cost of Racism. But you can see that racism cost everybody. Literally, sis was out trying to take a nice peaceful walk on her day off when she too was inflicted on when had to encounter the pain that is often inflicted on people of color and Black people specifically. So there was some moments of back and forth with her and the defense in particular. The first was about an EMT call. And so I can't remember the specific details because I wasn't writing it down at the time, but she's essentially disputing that there was a miscommunication between the officers that made the call and the dispatch that sent out the firefighter, EMT, paramedic people. Because this is her job, because she lives in the area, because she works for a unit in the area, she knew that it shouldn't have taken as long as it took them to get there to actually get there. So as he's kind of stating, I guess, the facts of when calls were made and that it was elevated because of the situation, she's actually disputing that happened, because if it happened, then why weren't they there? Which is essentially a part of why this off-duty firefighter, who was a trained EMT, saw someone in distress and wanted to help. And is that not, I think, what we would expect or what we would want in any situation when we are thinking about, being at a game and, someone faints or something like that? You want to know if there's a nurse or a doctor. You always hear about those situations on a plane, and is there a doctor on the plane? You want someone that is medically trained. If someone is in distress or someone needs medical attention, you want that person there, even if there is help on the way. Like, in what situation, in what world is someone in physical pain or physical danger, especially when there's something like impending death and there's a health professional around that can help me? Like, nah, girl, don't worry about it. Help's on the way. And it's like, help is right here. Fuck you mean? So I did not understand why it felt as though they were trying to set up this idea that there was no reason for her to want to help or to ask to intervene or ask for access to him because help was on the way. And if help was on the way, the video that we saw, I mean, how long was it before help actually showed up? So that's what she was disputing, and there seemed to be some contention with them as they kind of had the question and answer back and forth about that. There's also a point of contention when there was a question about she opted not to read the testimony that she gave to the investigators that showed up. So it happened May 25th. She does her interview May 28th. She chose not to read whatever that testimony was that she read. And so he's almost like trying to use her words against her in that moment, because she's using her memory while he's using what she wrote from her memory 3 days after it happened, I guess, while the memory was more fresh. And so she makes a characteristic about what he looked like, and that he was small and frail, I believe. I know frail is a part, small, I'm not sure. But that he was frail, and he wanted her to see that and read that, almost to say, like, look, you were wrong, is the way that I took it as. And what she said in that and in response to that was, well, yeah, he did look small and frail when there were 3 grown men that were kneeling on him, like that were actually on him. So there was some contention in getting that answer out, because they wanted her to look at the testimony, and she quite said, I opted out. And then he had mentioned it again. She said, I don't want to read it. And then he almost forced it upon her, and she was forced to read what she said. So anyways, there was also a point where I thought she did a really great job assessing, because she couldn't access him because the officers weren't allowing her to. She did a very good job of talking professionally through her process and assessing medically where she believed he was and why she believed it was so important that he get medical attention. And so there was a part, there were multiple moments where I just felt like her answers were just, yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, yes. So one of those moments was where he was talking about the stress of the situation. And he mentioned, stress is, this is the defense that's asking the question. He mentioned that, stress can greatly impact your memory. Right? And she's like, oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're lucky it was videotaped. And I was like, I mean, thank you. It's a blessing you're here. Like, he wasn't ready for that and literally was like, right, and started fumbling through his papers. Like he didn't expect that answer from her. When the defense was asking her, basically trying to paint the idea that they were too distracted to do their job and trying to paint this correlation of her professional job, and if you were, you know, giving CPR or whatever it might be and people are telling you that you're doing it wrong, and that was a part of it. And she responded and said, you know, I'm very confident in the training that I was given. There's no reason, you know, why I would be distracted by that. And then he followed it up with, what if they were calling you names? What if they were hurling insults at you? And what if they were this, and that? And she literally kept following it and was like, well, I'll repeat my answer. You know, I'm very confident in the training that I've been given. And the last part that I'll mention about two more things about her testimony. He also tried to paint her as angry because I guess at one point she did begin to curse and that sort of thing. And he said, you know, were you frustrated and angry? And she was like, you know, no, I wouldn't say that. Desperate. Desperate to help save the life of a man that y'all were killing. Desperate. She didn't say that, I said that, but desperate. The very last part that I'll mention about her testimony was at the very end, and this is the very end of the day, and I don't know if it was because there was some contention. You know, it was a very long day of testimony. There had been a lot of back and forth in terms of objections and overruled and sustained and all of that. There had been many of those that had happened that day. There was some contention with the very first witness, and so I don't know if Judge was tired or what, but I just felt like he let loose on the witness in a way that was unfair, and this is why I say it's unfair. Because I'm trying to use the analogy of, let's say, the NBA, right? There's a reason why you have to play at a certain level, and there are all of these different rules involved. So the average person cannot, maybe they think they can, but you can't walk off the street and walk into the NBA arena and play that game and play it at that level, right? And so we're talking to witnesses who have not only experienced a murder, as they've all described it to be, but they have experienced trauma because of that day and are now having to relive that. And not only in front of you, but this is national television. This is a trial that was on ABC, because I ain't seen The View, because it was on. This is a show that was on MSNBC, CNN, I mean, running all day. Everybody has seen it. And so she's doing this in front of the whole world, and she's an amateur in this arena, right? There are all of these different rules and procedures and ways in which you have to respond. I thought it was interesting, the first witness, when he was talking with the lawyer, a part where he was kind of getting, as the judge said, I think someone said it, characterized it as defensive in the courtroom, I believe, is when he's asking him, you know, well, did you call him a bum? Did you call him this? Did you call him a fucking bum? And he's like answering, he's like, that's what you heard? Like, that's what you heard? Yeah. And I thought it was interesting because, like, that's how people talk. Like, that's how black people talk. And black people are kind of admitting to something that they said. Like, if that's what you heard, basically, yeah. But that's not how you necessarily answer questions in a courtroom, right? Like, it's yes, they have to understand it in a particular way. And so I felt like that's a little bit with what was happening, because she was trying to complete her answer, and the lawyer, it seemed like, had jumped in maybe to ask another question, and then the judge very quickly, like, called them to pause, and then he went away for a second, and the lawyers went away for a second, and then when he came back, he literally just berated her and is like, you don't argue with the lawyers, and you don't argue with the court, and you're done with an answer when I say you're done with an answer. And I'm like, how you gonna tell me when I'm done with an answer? Like, again, there's a way in which that theater works, and you're dealing with people who are recounting trauma, and I just thought she should have been given a little more grace. She said that she was trying to complete her answer. You could simply tell her that, answer the question in this way, and leave it at that. So as you can see, there was a lot that happened day two, but I think the prosecution thus far has done a really, really great job with their witnesses and kind of streamlining the idea that everyone was witnessing a murder. All of their facts really lined up. All of them with this same feeling of wanting to help, and then obstructing and then being in the way of that ability to try and help someone who they said was who was hurting. A couple of things about their defense. Again, the unruly, distracted officers thing, I just don't understand it. I thought that particular exchange was weird, because going back to distracting them from what? Because that's your job to figure out, right? Like, he made this distinction of, well, you couldn't see those officers, those other two officers, and what they were doing and what they were talking about. She's like, well, actually, I could see their mouth, and they actually weren't talking at all, very much at all. This idea that there was something more that was going on that she possibly could have missed, because she didn't know everything that was going on because of her view and because of her limited context of when she came. And it's like, what she did know is that because of her professional background, there was a man in distress, and there was a man that she could not help. And if there were other things going on, what were they? What were they doing? What were they doing all that time? If they were so distracted from the crowd, why was Tal the only one that was addressing the crowd? If they were so distracted from the crowd, why didn't anybody look in distress of being distracted from the crowd? So this is a part that actually became in question when one of the young ladies, one of the minors that were testifying came up. One of the officers asked about, because she mentioned cars were, coming by quickly or whatever, and said, did he ever seem to, back up or move or make any motion to suggest that, like, he was concerned about oncoming traffic? And she said no. So I don't understand how a nigga that ain't concerned about oncoming traffic and doing this job is so concerned about a crowd of 12 people, seeming half of them at this point, it seems like, were minors that weren't doing anything. Nobody stepped off the curb. The only person that even had the confidence to step off the curb was the MMA fighter. He was instantly approached by Tal with his hand in his chest. So, like, I just thought that was strange. I also thought, I don't understand how it is favorable to a defense to paint an off-duty firefighter EMT who's just trying to have a peaceful day off and then experiencing a murder, witnessing a murder, how they are somehow just being nosy and in the way. I felt like that's what their line of questioning, how that was painting her. I wonder how the jurors, what they took away from that line of questioning, because it was like, how... Again, I mentioned this when I talked about her testimony, but how are we painting her as like this nosy person that's butting into, this nosy person that is butting into police business, which is actually something that she mentioned. Officer Tal said to her when she identified herself as a as a firefighter and wanted to, access the person. He said, if you're a firefighter, then basically to stay out of this, is what he said to her. I don't understand in all of this, right, how it is that police officers are the only people in a professional setting that get to do their job, be really bad at it, negligent, kill people, and then somehow it's everyone else's fault. And there is always some sort of reason that is not related to them and their poor job of doing their job as to why this happened. And I think this is one of the cases that, aside from maybe some of the others, but a lot of the others were just so blatant as well. So that continues to be a frustrating point in all of this is professionally, how are so many people able to be bad at their job and get rehired at the same job? How are so many people able to be bad at their job and suffer no consequences, even when death is involved? I don't get that in terms of the profession. Let's just set a new precedent going forward that police officers who are negligent and who kill citizens will be held accountable, and let's set a new precedent going forward with this case. The other part that I wanted to mention in terms of a takeaway was really what you began to really feel and understand with the storytelling as the end of the day wrapped, was that it isn't just George Floyd's family, and we know this is Black people, right? But I was hoping that the jurors would take away from this that it isn't just George Floyd's family that lost something that day, that lost a lot that day, that experienced something that they never thought they would experience that day. But it's all those community members, those 12 people that were sitting on the sidewalk pleading that they would stop killing this man in front of them. This lady who was just trying to have a walk on her day off. These kids that were just going to get a snack. Like, it cost everybody in this community when these things happen, and we know that as Black people, as a larger community, because it cost us. That was another takeaway. It was very difficult to continue to have to interact with this video because it was a part of evidence. This was actually the very first time I'd even seen video, like moving. I've seen stills, and you kind of refuse to look down because you know what's there. So I've only, in my head, I can only kind of see the officer's face. But I can be a very visual person. I'm also a very analytical person, so I get stuck on words and things that are said and how they're said and tonality and that sort of thing. I'm very communicative in that way, and so I never wanted to hear his voice. I never wanted to hear him cry out for his mom. That's just not something that I need, like, in my spirit inside of me. And so it was really, really hard, having to want to, like, really engage in the trial, not just from, like, the standpoint of a person watching, but try to really get into what's happening. But you have to, like, in a sense, you want to view and engage with the evidence in order to do that. So that was just particularly difficult to do. I just wish this was done. Like, I wish we were going to get to Friday and then it was going to be like guilty. I hope that we even get to a fucking guilty, right? But this isn't TV, and they mentioned that there's going to be, I think, a couple more weeks of this, more witnesses. But I want to know if the ex-officer is going to testify. Like, I don't know what he could possibly say that could help this situation. Maybe to, like, humanize what's going on, but the first witness said it perfectly. Like, he tried to intervene and basically couldn't, because there wasn't even a human connection. So on that note, I'm very, very thankful that you guys joined me for this very, very extensive video as we kind of talk about what happened in day 2. So as I keep up, I'll keep you guys up on things that are happening, and we'll talk about some more things that are going on here in the world. I'm absolutely going to talk about Matt Gaetz' trifling ass, so we'll get there. Bye!